So we've had the clearance from the ground crew, all the checklists are complete. So we're going to start engine 2 first. We do this by selecting number 2 and using the start push button. We now use the chronometer to start the time. As soon as we have an NH indication, we're going to select the fuel on. And if we have no light up within 10 seconds, you can see the fuel flow increasing and the turbine temperature increasing as well, showing that we have successful ignition on the right hand engine. Master caution at this stage perfectly satisfactory, and as the starter cut out as well. So we have successful ignition, the oil pressure is satisfactory at this stage. So we have a good engine start, we can reset the chronometer and commence the pushback. Once the first engine is started, we can disconnect the ground power and deselect it from the FMS, so the ground crew will take it away. And once we've got the clearance from the ground crew, we can then deselect the parking brake and push back as normal. We then await clearance from the ground crew to start the left engine. So once we've got that clearance, we make sure that the engine is looking clear and repeat the process. So select engine 1, the select light illuminates, we press the start push button, set the timer, and as soon as we have an NH indication, the fuel can go on. Within 10 seconds we need successful ignition, so the ITT increasing. Caution is normal at this stage, and the high pressure compressor should stabilise at around 64%. And there we have both engines stable. The chronometer can now be reset. And we await the end of the pushback procedure before we start the engines fully. Once the parking brake is set, we then await the disconnection of the ground crew and the clearance signal on the left hand side this time. So there's our marvellous looking ground personnel. And there we have the clearance signal, so we can now start the engines fully. So the end top range goes to 90%. You can hear the engine start to run up with the RPM increasing to the full range. At this stage we can select the standby hydraulic system, the PTU control as well, and we can test the number 3 system by opening the isolation valve. The master caution will illuminate and we should have sufficient pressure, and we test this by moving the elevators up and down, and you can see the system 3 remains pressurized. We then need to deselect the system number 3, so close the isolation valve, cancel the master caution, and we need to move the elevators a few times to make sure that the system 3 is fully depressurized. The guard can be then put back on. The fuel auxiliary pumps can then be selected on, auto feather on. The ground crew are now clear, so that we can select the nose wheel steering to on at this stage. We have sufficient hydraulic pressure, so we can set the flaps for takeoff, so 5 degrees, and 5 degrees is confirmed on the flap gauge. And the radar can be set to standby. We also need to check the rudder system, and this is done by selecting the powered flight control services to off. This illuminates the master caution, but with number 1 system off, the rudders should still operate. So I'm just going to check the rudders here, and we have full and free movement. Select number 1 back on, select number 2 off, master caution as normal. We still have full and free movement. Both rudder systems now on, and we have normal rudder movement, all working well. Next, we need to check the de-icing pressure, which is satisfactory, and test the de-icing system using function on the overhead panel. So we have the correct propeller heater lights. And then we don't require anti-icing for our departure today. It's about 14 degrees outside, so we can leave the anti-icing system off. So we can now run the after start number 2 checklist initially. We do have the option of taxiing single engine, but for ease of use during this demonstration I've decided to taxi out using both engines today. So we'll run both after start checklists, but the number 2 checklist reads external power APU off, or the APU is off and the external power is selected off as well, and at this stage the main bus tie can be selected off in addition. Radar standby, fuel pumps on, rudder we have full travel, the nose wheel steering is selected on, the hydraulics are checked, flaps 5 degrees set, de-ice pressure checked, and the after start number 1, the electrical panel is checked, so we have the DC AC generators on, the external power controls off, main bus tie can be off, and the batteries can remain on at this stage. Condition levers are max, auto feather is selected, PFD, MFD and ED, so the engine display, all parameters are satisfactory. The PFD is checked with normal indications, and the multifunction display at this stage can go on to navigation on both sides. So we can select navigation, and I'm going to use weather radar on my side, and the first officer can have terrain. So the PFD, MFD and ED are checked and set, and the bleeds are now selected on and in the minimum position. And that's the after start checks number 2 and number 1 complete. We'll select the flight control lock off, and I'm going to test the elevators. So if I have up deflection, down deflection, spoilers left and right, and neutral. So that's the flight controls checked. We can select the taxi light on now, and off we go. We're clear on the left and on the right, so let's get cracking. So we need to check during the taxi out that the instruments are working correctly. So we have a turn here, so we have right skid, left turn through 306 degrees on both sides, the horizon's level, and the HSI is tracking and turning correctly. So the instruments are checked. The yaw damper can be selected on now at this stage as well, and we can perform the takeoff configuration warning. And as you can see, we have no aural tone, which means that the airplane is configured correctly. If you haven't already done so, you also need to perform the brake check to make sure that the brakes are working satisfactorily, which I've just done. The brakes are working normally, and we can take the before takeoff checklist to the line at this stage. So brakes are checked, takeoff warning tested, takeoff power, end top, flight instruments are checked, flight controls are checked and free, yaw damper is on, and the cabin is secure. So we're going to go all the way down to holding point Alpha 1, which is our clearance limit. So there we are at holding point Alpha 1, and at this stage we can select the weather radar to on. The transponder can be selected on out so that we have TCAS indications, and we're also got altitude reporting for any radar stations that may be online in the vicinity. Nothing reported on Unicom, but we're just going to make a little visual check, make sure that the approach is clear on both sides and the runway is clear as well, and we're also going to state our intentions on VATSIM. We can see on TCAS that there is an aircraft just to the west of the airfield, but he shouldn't affect our operation. The rest of the runway appears to be clear, and the approach appears to be clear as well. So we can perform the before takeoff checklist below the line. The lights are set, so the landing lights are on, taxi light can be selected off, and we have white anti-collision selected. Transponder we have set 2000 and on alt. Cabin crew warned. The pitot static system is on. Flight mode enunciator, we have heading select, go around, and alt cell mode armed. And the caution and warning panel is blank. So we're good to go. Another visual check of the approach and the runway just to make sure everything's clear. And then off we go. So we're lined up at this stage. We can now select the spoilers to flight, make sure that we have correct spoiler deployment, and the spoiler lights illuminate, and we're now good to go, so we can head off. Spoiler lights automatically extinguish. We advance the power levers to full. Correct engine power is selected and the auto feather is armed. Maintaining directional control with the rudder, rotating and selecting 10 degrees. Positive rate of climb, the gear can be selected up, and we're above 400 feet now, so we can select nav. A little bit bumpy as you can see. We have LNAV now on the FMA. We've passed the 1000 feet point. The autopilot can be selected on. Bleeds to normal. We have amber bleed indications, so we can set climb power. So the climb power with the correct torque is set. We're above flap retraction speed now, so we can set flap 0 and IAS 210 for the standard Type 1 climb. And at this stage we can take the after takeoff checklist. So the landing gear is up, flaps 0, Leads on and normal, and the climb power is set. So we'll say, for argument's sake, that we're cleared to flight level 160 now initially. Alt cell remains armed, and now that we're cleared to a flight level above the transition altitude, we push the barometric setting knob to select 1013, which is confirmed on both altimeters. At this stage, the standby hide and PTU controls can be selected off, fuel pumps off, the autofeather can be selected off as well. Checking the pressurization indication, so you can see the cabin rate is climbing, so the aircraft is pressurizing normally, the differential is increasing, and the cabin altitude is increasing satisfactorily as well. And we can now take the climb checklist. So altimeters 1013, pressurization checked, standby hide PDU control normal, fuel pumps off, and the auto feather off as well, and that's the climb checklist complete.